Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into a story that is, honestly, equal parts thrilling and deeply, deeply unsettling. We're looking at a monumental challenge that just absolutely captured the world's imagination. A mission that pushed the very limits of human endurance, not to mention Victorian engineering. We are, of course, talking about the legendary Lost Franklin expedition. It's a massive story of ambition, nature's totally unforgiving power, and a mystery that is quite literally echoed through history.
Okay, let's dive into this. How does an entire state-of-the-art expedition with 129 men just completely vanish? That is the haunting question framing our whole journey today. We're not just talking about a couple of explorers taking a wrong turn in the woods. We are talking about the complete and total disappearance of a massive, heavily funded, wildly technologically advanced expedition. 129 men, simply gone without a trace. To even wrap our heads around how something like this could be possible, we've got to understand the mindset and really the era in which this whole mission began.
Section 1. The Ultimate Arctic Challenge, Conquering the Northwest Passage.
So picture this. It's the spring of 1845, and the British Empire is sitting at the absolute height of its global power. They were the pioneers of industry, absolute masters of the sea, just projecting this supreme confidence all over the globe. But despite all this might and technological muscle, there was this one massive geographic challenge that remained totally unconquered by anyone: the Northwest Passage. Now you have to understand, this wasn't just some expedition for the sake of, scientific curiosity. It held immense strategic and historical weight. Finding this legendary sea route through the frozen Arctic promised a much faster, far more lucrative trade connection between Europe and Asia. The British Empire basically viewed this frozen maze as the final locked door in their global maritime network, and they were absolutely determined to be the ones to kick it open.
Section 2. Preparing for the unknown. Equipping the expedition. Let's move to and see how this builds.
You see, to conquer a challenge of this magnitude, you don't just send out an ordinary crew. You assemble a mission on a massive, literally unprecedented scale. They were preparing for the great unknown, and their plan was basically to overwhelm the Arctic with sheer technological and logistical superiority. And the man chosen to lead this historic, incredibly high-stakes mission? Sir John Franklin. At 59 years old, the guy was practically stepping right out of retirement. But what made him so uniquely qualified was his decades of polar experience. Fun fact, he already had this wild reputation back in Britain for extreme survival. He was literally known as the man who ate his boots after a previous expedition where his crew was starving. So here he is, stepping into what he fully believed was going to be the absolute greatest adventure of his life.
And he was certainly not going it alone. The human scale of this mission was just immense. We're talking 129 officers and sailors boarding two magnificent vessels for this journey, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror. Now, these weren't just your standard wooden sailing ships. No way. They were the state-of-the-art marvels of their time. They were specially reinforced, decked out, and totally prepared to carry this massive crew straight into the most hostile environment on Earth.
And this brilliantly illustrates their absolute undeniable overconfidence. 3. The ships were meticulously stocked with enough food to last the entire crew of 129 men for 3 full years. 3 years. That's an insane amount of provisions. It was a very clear signal to the world that they were prepared to wait out literally any obstacle, fully believing that British logistics could just sustain them indefinitely in the freezing wilderness. But they packed way more than just food. The equipment manifest is honestly fascinating. The ships were actually retrofitted with advanced steam engines, which gave them this unprecedented power to push right through the ice. They brought scientific instruments, all sorts of survival equipment, and, incredibly, these totally out-of-place items like solid mahogany writing desks, fine silver cutlery, and thousands of books. It was complete Victorian luxury, meant to literally tame the harsh Arctic. Just imagine the scene at the harbor during their departure. You've got these huge crowds gathering, cheering wildly as the expedition proudly disappears over the horizon. It was this massive moment of supreme national pride. And yet, tragically, not a single person standing on that dock had any idea that they would never, ever see those men alive again.
Section 3. The Final Sighting, Into the Frozen Unknown.
So, the initial phase of the journey was exactly the triumph everyone expected. They successfully crossed the Atlantic Ocean and made it all the way to the Canadian Arctic. But when we look at this timeline, it shows a chillingly rapid progression from triumph to total tragedy. Let's trace it out. They depart England in the spring of 1845, complete with those cheering crowds we talked about. By the summer of 1845, they're making fantastic time, and they're actually spotted by whalers up in the Canadian Arctic. But then, by the winter of 1845, the situation drastically, completely changes. They become totally trapped in the ice. It is just a terrifyingly fast transition from this state-of-the-art, top-of-the-world expedition to a doomed one.
During that summer, you see, other whaling ships operating up in the area spotted Franklin's expedition. The Erebus and Terror were simply waiting for the sea ice to break so they could continue their big push through the passage. The whalers exchanged greetings with Franklin's men, and the sailors waved goodbye. That cheerful wave across the freezing water was the last confirmed sighting of the entire expedition.
Section 4. Trapped in Frozen Darkness, the silent grip of the Arctic ice. The tone of our story completely shifts right here. Because as the summer faded, the brutal Arctic winter finally arrived. And the sea didn't just freeze over. Enormous, crushing sheets of ice moved in and trapped both vessels entirely. The HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror were completely locked in place. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the terrifying contrast it sets up. On one side, you have the absolute height of Victorian hubris, right? The unsinkable preparation, those retrofitted steam engines, the thousands of books to read in perfect comfort, the 3 whole years of rations. But on the other side, you have the lethal, totally uncaring reality of the Arctic environment. We're talking temperatures plunging below negative 40 degrees Celsius, which, by the way, is exactly negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit too. And above them, endless, pitch-black darkness covered the Arctic for months on end. Because here's the thing. No steam engine and absolutely no mahogany desk or book can negotiate with enormous, crushing ice sheets and total sensory deprivation.
This quote right here just perfectly encapsulates the sheer psychological horror of their reality. The men waited, then waited longer, but the ice never released them. I want you to try and put yourself in their shoes for a second. Just imagine 129 men sitting inside these wooden ships, totally surrounded by absolute freezing darkness for months. You're burning coal, you're eating canned rations, and you're just waiting. Waiting for a spring thaw that simply never arrives. The ice holds you incredibly tight, and the eerie silence of the Arctic is only broken by the sudden, terrifying groaning of the ship's massive timber under the immense pressure of the freezing ocean.
We've seen the preparation, we've seen the unbelievable pride, and we've seen the sudden, silent end to their forward momentum. But what happens to the human mind and spirit when all that Victorian might, all that rock-solid confidence and advanced technology is completely paralyzed by the endless, silent grip of the Arctic? It's a question that leaves us with a terrifying, entirely unsolved fate. And really, it serves as a timeless reminder of just how fragile human ego and technology truly are when they're suddenly faced with the raw, totally indifferent power of nature. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep exploring.